The gunshot echoed through the valley as Willow Nielsen's trembling hands clutched the letter that had shattered her world, her husband's handwriting confirming what the whispers around Fort Worth, Texas, had already told her: he wasn't coming back. It was 1878, and at 26 years old, Willow found herself abandoned on their struggling ranch, left with nothing but a mountain of debt, a dying crop, and the humiliation of knowing everyone in town had seen Thomas Nielsen riding out with the banker's daughter 2 days ago. Willow crumpled the paper in her fist and fired the revolver again, watching the tin can leap from the fence post. Shooting things was better than crying, and she'd done enough crying since finding the letter tucked beneath their wedding photograph that morning. The spring air carried the scent of bluebonnets and fresh grass, mocking her with its promise of new beginnings while her life crumbled around her. "You planning to shoot every can in Texas, or just the ones on your property?" The deep voice startled her. Willow whirled around, keeping the revolver raised, to find a tall stranger leaning against the gatepost. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, the kind of practical attire that marked experienced cowboys. The stranger's face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline darkened with several days' worth of beard. "You're trespassing," Willow said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man pushed his hat back, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Kieran Hayes. Your neighbor Franklin mentioned you might need help with spring planting." He nodded toward the fields. "Though, from the looks of things, you might need help with more than that." Willow lowered the gun slightly. "Mr. Franklin should mind his own business." "He also mentioned you've got a quick temper," Kieran said, a hint of amusement crossing his features. "Said it matches your hair." Despite herself, Willow felt a flush creep up her neck. Her copper-red hair had always been a source of comments, most of them unwelcome. "Mr. Franklin talks too much," she replied, finally lowering the gun completely. "And I don't need charity." "Good, because I'm not offering any." Kieran straightened and took a few steps toward her. "I'm offering honest work for honest pay. I've got experience with cattle, crops, and fixing just about anything that can break on a ranch." Willow studied him more carefully. His hands were calloused from labor, and despite his relaxed demeanor, she noticed the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, a habit of men who'd spent time watching for danger. There was something about him that seemed reliable, solid in a way Thomas never had been. "My husband left," she said bluntly. 2 days ago, took what money we had. I can't pay you." If she expected pity, she didn't get it. Instead, Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "When's your crop due?" 6 weeks if the weather holds." "Then we've got 6 weeks to get things in order." He gestured to her gun. "You're a good shot. Got any other skills?" Willow blinked, surprised by his matter-of-fact approach. "I can cook, sew, and I know this land better than anyone. Been working it 5 years alongside—" She stopped, unable to say Thomas's name without her voice betraying her. "That's a start." Kieran removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Here's what I propose. I'll work your land until harvest. You feed me and give me a place to sleep. When we sell the crop, we split the profits. And if there are no profits? Then I'll have wasted my time and you'll have nothing to lose." He held her gaze steadily. "What do you say, Mrs. Nielsen?" Willow looked past him to the fields that needed planting, the barn that needed repairs, and the house that suddenly felt too empty. Pride warred with practicality. Without help, she'd lose everything. With this stranger, she at least had a chance. "The bunkhouse is empty," she said finally. "It's not much, but it's yours until harvest." Kieran's smile transformed his face, revealing a warmth she hadn't expected. "I've slept under stars more often than roofs, Mrs. Nielsen. The bunkhouse will be just fine." "Willow," she corrected him. "If we're going to be partners, might as well use my name." "Willow," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her heart skip a beat. "I think we have a deal." Neither of them realized then how much that simple agreement would change everything. The first few days established a cautious routine. Kieran rose before dawn, starting chores before Willow even emerged from the main house. She'd find the chicken coop already tended, fresh eggs collected, and coffee brewing in the kitchen. By the end of the first week, they'd repaired the broken fence line, prepared the soil for planting, and begun work on the leaking barn roof. Willow found herself watching Kieran when he wasn't looking, noting the careful precision with which he approached each task, so different from Thomas's impatient rush to finish things. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day's work, Willow finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why were you looking for work? You seem capable enough to have steady employment." Kieran took a sip of coffee before answering. "I was riding with a cattle drive from San Antonio. When we reached Fort Worth, the trail boss and I had a disagreement." "What kind of disagreement?" "The kind that ends with fists." He rubbed his jaw, a rueful expression crossing his face. He thought discipline meant whipping a young drover for falling asleep on watch. "I disagreed." Willow studied him in the fading light. "So you stood up for someone else and lost your job for it?" He shrugged. "Wouldn't call it noble, just couldn't stomach watching it happen." They fell silent, listening to the crickets beginning their evening chorus. Finally, Kieran spoke again. "Mind if I ask you something?" Willow tensed but nodded. "Your husband," Kieran said carefully. "Folk in town are talking. Said he left with Josephine Blackwell, the banker's daughter." Willow's throat tightened. "People should mind their own business." "They should," he agreed. "But in small towns, gossip is like currency." "Then yes," she said, her voice hard. "Thomas left with Josephine. Apparently they'd been meeting for months. Her father offered him a position at the bank, a house in town, and his daughter's hand." The bitterness she'd been suppressing rose to the surface. Everything he couldn't get with a farmer's wife. Kieran was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "He gave up gold for dust." Willow turned to him confused. "What?" "Something my father used to say when men made foolish choices." Kieran's eyes met hers, intense and sincere. "Your husband gave up gold for dust, Willow. Only a fool would leave something real and precious for something that just shines pretty in the light." Something shifted in her chest at his words, not healing exactly, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that what had broken inside her might someday mend. Before she could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. They both looked toward the horizon where storm clouds gathered, promising much-needed rain for their newly planted fields. "Going to be a good one," Kieran observed, standing up. "I'd better secure the barn doors." Willow watched him stride across the yard, his words echoing in her mind. Gold for dust. She'd never thought of herself as anything precious, especially not in these past days when she'd felt so thoroughly discarded. But the way Kieran had said it made her wonder if perhaps there was more value in her than Thomas had ever recognized. The storm arrived with spectacular force just before midnight. Willow startled awake to the crash of thunder directly overhead and the sound of rain hammering against the roof. A flash of lightning illuminated her bedroom, followed immediately by another crash and the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. She threw on a robe and rushed to the window. Another flash revealed disaster part of the old oak tree had broken off and crashed onto the bunkhouse roof. Without thinking, Willow grabbed a lantern and ran outside into the downpour, heedless of the mud squelching between her bare toes. "Kieran!" she shouted, struggling to be heard over the storm. "Kieran!" The bunkhouse door burst open, and he emerged, shirt hastily thrown on and hair plastered to his head from the rain. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him unharmed. "Inside!" he shouted, gesturing toward the main house. "Roof's coming down!" They raced back through the deluge, bursting into the kitchen, both of them drenched and breathless. Kieran's shirt clung to his chest, and Willow suddenly became acutely aware of her thin nightgown beneath the equally soaked robe. "Are you hurt?" she asked, moving to light the kitchen lamp. "No, just wet." He ran a hand through his dripping hair. "The branch came through the corner, away from the bed. But it's not safe in there now." Willow nodded, trying to think practically despite her pounding heart. "You can take the spare room tonight. We'll assess the damage in the morning." An awkward silence fell between them as they stood dripping on her kitchen floor, suddenly aware of their state of undress and the intimacy of the situation. Kieran cleared his throat. "I should find some dry clothes." "Yes," she said quickly. "I have some of Thomas's things you can borrow." The moment she said it, she regretted mentioning her husband's name. It hung in the air between them, a reminder of her status and the boundaries that should exist. Kieran's expression shifted slightly. "Thank you," he said formally. When they'd both changed and the crisis had passed, an awkwardness lingered. Kieran insisted on sleeping on the floor of the spare room rather than using the bed, despite Willow's objections. As she returned to her own room, Willow found herself unsettled not by the storm outside, but by the unexpected feelings stirring within. The morning brought clear skies and the full view of the damage. The oak branch had punched a hole through the bunkhouse roof, allowing rain to soak most of the interior. It would take weeks to repair properly. "I can rig a temporary cover," Kieran said as they surveyed the damage. "Keep the weather out until we have time to fix it right." Willow shook her head. "It doesn't make sense for you to sleep out here with a hole in the roof. The spare room is sitting empty." She hesitated, then added, "The house is plenty big enough for both of us." Kieran studied her face. "People will talk." "People already talk," she replied with a shrug. "Let them. I know what's true." What was true, Willow realized as the days passed, was that Kieran Hayes was becoming essential to her in ways that went beyond their business arrangement. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch, to the sound of his deep laugh when something amused him, to the quiet competence with which he approached every task. They fell into an easy rhythm of shared meals and shared work. Kieran taught Willow how to mend harnesses and reinforced her skills with a rifle. She showed him her mother's secret recipe for biscuits and the best fishing spots along the creek that bordered the property. As April gave way to May, their crop flourished under favorable conditions. The corn stood tall and green, promising a bountiful harvest. Each successful day felt like a small victory, especially as Willow heard rumors from town that Thomas and Josephine's relationship was already showing strain. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything changed. They'd ridden into Fort Worth for supplies, Willow's first visit to town since Thomas's departure. She held her head high despite the whispers and stares that followed them down the main street. At the general store, Kieran loaded their purchases while Willow settled their account. She was just finishing when the door opened, and Thomas walked in with Josephine Blackwell on his arm. The young woman was dressed in an expensive blue dress that highlighted her delicate features and golden hair. Thomas looked prosperous in a new suit, though Willow immediately noticed the strain around his eyes. The store fell silent as everyone watched the drama unfold. Thomas stopped short when he saw Willow, genuine surprise crossing his face before he composed himself into a polite smile. "Willow," he said with a nod, "good to see you in town." She straightened her spine, grateful for the simple but clean dress she'd chosen that morning. "Thomas. Miss Blackwell." Josephine had the grace to look uncomfortable, her eyes darting between husband and wife. "I hear you've kept the farm going," Thomas continued, his tone suggesting he'd expected otherwise. "That's good." Before Willow could respond, Kieran appeared at her side, his presence steady and reassuring. "Wagons loaded," he said, then extended his hand to Thomas. "Kieran Hayes, I'm working with Mrs. Nielsen." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly as he shook the offered hand. Thomas Nielsen. His gaze moved between them, clearly drawing conclusions. "I see you found help quickly enough." The insinuation in his tone made Willow's cheeks burn, but Kieran's calm voice cut through her embarrassment. "Mrs. Nielsen runs a tight ship," he said evenly. "The crop's coming in better than expected. Should clear all debts with some profit to spare." Josephine tugged at Thomas's arm, clearly wanting to escape the awkward encounter. "Thomas, we should let these people get on with their day." "Of course, darling," Thomas replied, but Willow caught the fleeting expression that crossed his face, something like doubt, or perhaps regret. As they turned to leave, Kieran's voice stopped them. "Mr. Nielsen," he said, his tone conversational but carrying enough to be heard by those watching. Some men wouldn't recognize a gold mine if they were standing in it. Lucky for those of us who can tell the difference between gold and dust. Thomas stiffened but didn't turn back, hurrying Josephine from the store. When they'd gone, Willow released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Kieran's eyes were still on the door. "Yes, I did." The ride home was mostly silent, but something had shifted between them. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, Willow finally spoke the thoughts that had been circling in her mind. "You know what the worst part was?" she said, staring into the gathering darkness. "Not that he left, though. That hurt plenty. It was that he made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like there was something wrong with wanting this life, this land." Kieran turned to look at her, his profile illuminated by the soft glow from the window. "And now?" "Now," she considered the question carefully. "Now I think maybe the problem wasn't me at all. Maybe it was that he never really saw me, never saw what mattered." "And what matters to you, Willow?" Her name on his lips still sent a small thrill through her. "This land, building something that lasts, living honestly." She paused, gathering her courage, and being seen, really seen. Kieran's eyes held hers. "I see you." 3 simple words, but they resonated through her with the force of truth. In that moment, with crickets singing and stars emerging above them, Willow recognized what had been growing between them all these weeks, something deeper and truer than she'd ever experienced with Thomas. Kieran reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of copper hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I've been seeing you since the day I found you shooting cans." Willow's heart pounded as she leaned slightly into his touch. "And what do you see?" Someone stronger than she knows, someone with fire in her hair and steel in her spine. His fingers traced the line of her jaw. Someone who deserves to be chosen first, every day, without question. The distance between them disappeared as Willow moved closer, her hand finding his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I'm still married," she whispered, the last barrier between them. "I know," Kieran replied, his forehead resting against hers, "and I respect that. But Thomas made his choice. Sooner or later, you'll need to make yours." They remained that way for several heartbeats, close but not crossing the final line. When Willow finally pulled back, it wasn't rejection, but a promise in her eyes. "I need time." Kieran nodded, his smile gentle with understanding. "Time is something I can give." The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as the harvest approached. The crop thrived beyond expectations, promising enough profit to clear Willow's debts and leave something substantial to reinvest. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, their movements increasingly synchronized, anticipating each other's needs with an ease that spoke of deep connection. The tension between them remained, acknowledged but respectfully contained. Kieran never pressed, never demanded, but Willow felt his gaze following her, saw the way his hands sometimes hesitated before touching her, even casually. For her part, she found herself seeking reasons to be near him, to share small moments of connection amid their busy days. It was during this time that news came from town. Thomas had filed for divorce. The messenger was Mrs. Fowler, the midwife, who stopped by occasionally to check on Willow. "He's claiming abandonment," Mrs. Fowler said as she accepted a cup of tea at Willow's kitchen table. "Which is rich considering he's the one who left. But with his new father-in-law being who he is, I doubt anyone will contest it." Willow's hands trembled slightly as she set down the teapot. "He's already planning to marry her?" Mrs. Fowler's expression softened. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry." "Yes, word is they'll wed as soon as the divorce is final. The banker's pushing for it, especially with all the talk." "Talk?" Willow asked, though she suspected she knew. "About you and your cowboy." Mrs. Fowler glanced toward the window where Kieran could be seen working in the field. Nothing scandalous, mind you. People just notice things, the way he looks at you, the way you've bloomed since he arrived. Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's not my business, the older woman interrupted gently. But I've known you since you were a girl, Willow. I've never seen you look at Thomas the way you look at that man out there. She reached across the table to pat Willow's hand. Life's too short for regrets, dear. Thomas has moved on. Maybe it's time you did too. That evening, Willow told Kieran about the divorce proceedings. They sat at the kitchen table, the remains of dinner between them, as she explained Thomas's intentions. So he wants to marry her officially, Kieran said, his expression carefully neutral. Yes, Willow replied, studying her hands. Mrs. Fowler says it should be final within a month or two. Kieran was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? It was a deceptively simple question that required a complicated answer. Willow considered it carefully. Relieved, mostly, she admitted. And free. She looked up to find his eyes on her. I thought I'd feel more anger or pain, but it's like the final string being cut on something that was already broken. He nodded, understanding in his gaze. And after? What happens when the harvest is in and your debts are paid? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. What happened after their arrangement ended? Would he move on, find another ranch, another job? The thought created a hollow feeling in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. I haven't thought that far ahead, she lied. Kieran's small smile told her he knew better. Well, there's time yet to decide. Time, however, had other plans. 2 nights later, they were awakened by the sound of horses and men's voices. Kieran was up first, rifle in hand, as Willow hurriedly pulled on a robe and grabbed her revolver from beside the bed. They met in the hallway, moving silently to the window that overlooked the front yard. In the moonlight, they could make out 4 mounted men. Even from a distance, Willow could smell the whiskey on them. "Nielsen!" one of them shouted. "Come out, Nielsen! We know you're in there!" Kieran's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he whispered. "Not a chance," Willow hissed back. "This is my home." Before he could argue, she moved toward the door, revolver ready. Kieran followed, positioning himself slightly in front of her as they stepped onto the porch. "Nielsen isn't here," Willow called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And you're trespassing." The men shifted in their saddles, clearly surprised to see a woman. The leader, a bearded man Willow recognized as one of the hands from the Double R Ranch, squinted at them. "Well, if it ain't Mrs. Nielsen," he slurred, "and who's your friend?" "None of your concern," Kieran replied, his rifle pointed steadily at the group. "State your business or leave." The bearded man laughed. "Heard you've been causing trouble for Thomas Nielsen in town, making him look bad in front of his new lady." He spat on the ground. "Thomas is a friend, says you've been spreading lies." Willow's temper flared. "My husband abandoned this ranch in his vows. That's no lie." "Husband, huh?" The man gestured toward Kieran. "Then what's he doing here? Folks say you replaced Thomas mighty quick." "That's enough," Kieran said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've been drinking and making poor decisions. Best one you can make now is to ride away." For a tense moment, it seemed the men might escalate the confrontation. Then one of them, a younger man at the back, spoke up nervously. "Cobb, that's Kieran Hayes. Heard he took down 3 outlaws in Laredo last year." The name seemed to register with the leader. His bravado faltered slightly as he reassessed the steady man with the rifle. "This ain't worth our time," he finally decided, turning his horse. "But you watch yourself, Hayes. Thomas has friends in this county." "So do I," Kieran replied evenly. "And unlike Thomas, I don't abandon them." The men rode off, their drunken voices fading into the night. When they were gone, Willow realized she was shaking, the aftermath of fear and anger coursing through her. "You took down 3 outlaws in Laredo?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Kieran lowered his rifle, a grim smile touching his lips. 2, actually, and it was El Paso." He looked down at her, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" The question undid her carefully maintained composure. Willow felt tears spring to her eyes, not from fear, but from the sheer unfairness of it all, that Thomas could leave her. and still somehow make her the villain of the story. "No," she admitted. "I'm not all right. I'm furious. How dare he send his friends here? How dare he spread stories about me when he's the one who—" Her voice broke, anger giving way to something more vulnerable. Kieran set aside his rifle and drew her into his arms. Willow went willingly, pressing her face against his chest. Breathing in the scent of his soap and leather and the clean cotton of his nightshirt. His heartbeat was strong beneath her ear, a steady rhythm that calmed her own racing pulse. "Thomas Nielsen is a fool," Kieran murmured against her hair. "And those men are just drunk cowards. None of them matter." Willow pulled back slightly to look up at him. "And you? Do you matter?" In answer, Kieran lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Willow responded, rising on her toes to press closer, the kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and honest. His hands cradled her face as if she were precious, while hers clutched at his shoulders, anchoring herself to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran pressed his forehead to hers. "I meant what I said before. I respect that you're still legally bound to him. If you want me to stop—" Willow silenced him with another kiss, brief but certain. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered against his mouth. "I want you to stay, tonight, tomorrow, after the harvest." His eyes searched hers in the moonlight. "You're sure? People will talk even more." A smile curved her lips. "Let them. We'll give them something worth talking about." That night changed everything. Kieran followed Willow to her bedroom, where their newfound honesty extended to the exploration of each other's bodies. He touched her with reverent hands, discovering the map of her desires with patient attention that Thomas had never shown. In turn, she found the courage to claim what she wanted, to shed the constraints of what a proper wife should be, and become simply a woman in love. Afterward, lying in the tangle of sheets with Kieran's arm curved protectively around her waist, Willow felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what had been missing, not just physical satisfaction, but the bone-deep certainty of being truly known and accepted. "I love you," Kieran murmured against her shoulder, the words simple and unadorned. "Have since I watched you standing in that field, too stubborn to cry." Willow turned in his arms to face him, tracing the strong line of his jaw with her fingers. "I think I started falling the moment you said he gave up gold for dust." She smiled, remembering. "No one had ever made me feel valuable before." "You are," he said seriously. "More than gold, more than this land, more than anything." She believed him, and that belief became the foundation for everything that followed. The days leading up to harvest were filled with hard work and stolen moments of joy. They still maintained propriety when others were present, but alone, they explored this new relationship with the wonder of people who had found something unexpected and precious. Their nights were spent learning each other's stories. Kieran told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his family to influenza when he was 17, about the years of drifting from ranch to ranch, looking for somewhere that felt like home. Willow shared memories of her parents, of meeting Thomas at a church social when she was just 19, of the gradual realization that his promises had been as insubstantial as morning mist. "I thought love was supposed to hurt sometimes," she confessed one night, her head pillowed on Kieran's chest. That feeling inadequate was normal. His arms tightened around her. "Real love doesn't diminish you," he said. "It makes you more yourself, not less." Harvest came with perfect weather and abundant yield. The corn stood tall and golden, ready to be gathered. They worked from dawn to dusk, joined by 3 hired hands from town, bringing in a crop that exceeded even their optimistic expectations. When the last wagon was loaded and the workers paid, Willow and Kieran stood together in the empty field, surveying their accomplishment. "We did it," she said, weary but triumphant. Kieran's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her against his side. "You did it, Willow. This is your victory." She shook her head. "Ours. I couldn't have done it without you." The following day, They rode into Fort Worth together to sell their harvest and settle accounts. The price was better than expected, and after paying off the outstanding debts, Willow found herself with a substantial sum remaining. "Enough to make improvements," she said as they rode home, plans already forming in her mind. "Maybe even expand next year." Kieran smiled but seemed distracted. As they approached the ranch, he suggested they stop at the creek, their favorite spot for quiet conversations. Willow agreed, curious about his sudden pensiveness. They sat on the bank watching the clear water flow over smooth stones. Kieran seemed to be gathering his thoughts, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Our agreement is complete," he finally said. "The harvest is in, the debts are paid." A cold fear clutched at Willow's heart. "Are you saying you want to leave?" "No," he replied quickly, taking her hand. "God, no, I'm saying—" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying I want to stay, but not as your hired hand, not even as just your partner." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the afternoon light, a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "I've carried it all these years, waiting for the right person." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "I know your divorce isn't final yet. I know we'd have to wait, but I want to marry you, Willow. Build a life here. With you." Tears blurred Willow's vision as she looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. "People will talk," she said, echoing his earlier concern, but now with a smile breaking through her tears. "Let them," he replied, using her own words. "We'll give them something worth talking about." Willow's answer was in her kiss, in the way she held out her hand for him to slide the ring onto her finger, in the promise whispered against his lips. Yes. 1,000 times. Yes. They didn't have to wait long. Thomas, eager to begin his new life with Josephine, expedited the divorce proceedings. By late summer, Willow was legally free. She and Kieran married in a simple ceremony under the oak tree on their property, witnessed by Mrs. Fowler, Mr. Franklin, and a few other friends who had stood by her through the difficult months. News traveled quickly through Fort Worth that Willow Nielsen was now Willow Hayes, and that the handsome cowboy who had helped save her farm was now its co-owner. Some disapproved of the hasty remarriage, but most who knew the couple saw the genuine love between them and offered congratulations instead of criticism. Thomas and Josephine were conspicuously absent from town during this time, having traveled to Dallas for an extended stay. When they returned, it was to news that the bank was facing financial difficulties, rumors that Mr. Blackwell had made some unwise investments. The grand lifestyle Thomas had left his wife for was already showing cracks in its foundation. Willow felt no satisfaction in his troubles. She was too busy building her new life to concern herself with the old one. She and Kieran worked side by side, expanding their operation, adding cattle to complement the crops and planning for the future with the shared vision of people who valued the same things. When winter came, bringing cooler temperatures and quiet evenings by the fire, Willow discovered she was expecting their first child. Kieran's joy at the news was boundless, his protective instincts immediately engaging as he insisted she rest more and leave the heavier work to him. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one evening as he took over kneading bread dough she had already started. "Humor me," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've waited my whole life for this, for you, for us, for a family. Let me enjoy taking care of you both." She relented, secretly treasuring his concern, even as she insisted on maintaining her independence in other ways. Their partnership remained equal, decisions made together, the future planned as a shared vision. Spring brought new life to the land and to their home. Willow gave birth to a healthy son they named James, after Kieran's father. As she watched her husband cradle their newborn with gentle hands that could break a wild horse or build a barn, Willow felt a completion she had never thought possible. "He's perfect," Kieran whispered, awe in his voice as tiny fingers wrapped around his larger one. "Just like his mother." Willow smiled, exhausted but deeply content. "He has your eyes," Poor kid, Kieran joked, but his gaze never left his son's face. He'll have everything else from you, I hope. Your courage, your determination, your heart. And your steadiness, Willow added, your honesty, your way of seeing the true value in things. They looked up at the same moment, their eyes meeting over their child's head, the love between them a tangible force. In that moment, Willow thought of Thomas's words in his farewell letter that he deserved more than a hardscrabble existence on a struggling farm, that he was meant for better things than she could offer. How wrong he had been. There was nothing better than this love, this family, this life built with honest hands and true hearts. Thomas had traded gold for dust, just as Kieran had said. But in doing so, he had inadvertently given Willow the greatest gift of all, the chance to find something real and lasting with a man who recognized her worth. As years passed, the Hayes ranch prospered. They added to their family a daughter, Charlotte, born 2 years after James, and another son, William, 3 years after that. The children grew strong and happy, learning the value of hard work alongside the importance of love and loyalty. Occasionally, Willow would see Thomas in town, their paths crossing at the general store or post office. Time had not been kind to him. The banking crisis had cost him his position and much of his status. Josephine, used to luxury, had grown bitter with its loss. The golden future Thomas had envisioned had tarnished quickly, leaving him with the hollow realization of what he had thrown away. During one such encounter, 7 years after he had left, Thomas stopped Willow outside the mercantile. Gray now threaded his hair, and lines of disappointment had etched themselves around his mouth. "You look well, Willow," he said, his eyes taking in her simple but well-made dress, the healthy glow of her skin, the quiet confidence in her bearing. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied politely. "I am well." His gaze moved to where Kieran stood a short distance away, helping their children select candy with patient attention to their excited requests. "Your family seems happy." "We are," she said simply. There was no need to elaborate, no desire to compare. Thomas nodded, a complex emotion crossing his features. "I made a mistake," he admitted quietly. "Leaving the way I did. Leaving you." Willow studied the man she had once loved, feeling nothing but a distant pity. "No," she said finally. "You made a choice. And so did I." She smiled, watching as her youngest son ran to Kieran, arms raised to be lifted. "We both got what we deserved, Thomas." She left him standing there, joining her family with light steps. Kieran's arm slipped naturally around her waist as she approached, his questioning glance asking without words if she was all right. "Perfect," she assured him, leaning into his solid presence. "Everything is perfect." That evening, with the children asleep and the day's work complete, they sat on the porch swing that Kieran had built during her first pregnancy. The ranch spread before them, cattle grazing in the distance, fields promising another good harvest, the home they had created together, solid and welcoming behind them. "I saw you talking to Thomas today," Kieran said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Anything important?" Willow rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, still soap and leather after all these years, with hints of the tobacco he occasionally enjoyed. "Nothing that matters anymore." "You're sure?" She lifted her head to look at him, this man who had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself, who had built a life with her based on respect and genuine partnership, who loved their children with the same fierce devotion he showed to her. "Very sure," she said, reaching up to trace the laugh lines around his eyes, the features that had become more dear to her with each passing year. "You were right that first day, you know." "About what?" he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "About Thomas giving up gold for dust." She smiled, the certainty of their love a warm presence between them. "I'm just grateful that when he did, he left the gold for you to find." Kieran's smile matched hers, the connection between them as strong as it had been from the beginning. "No, Willow," he corrected gently. "We found each other, and that's worth more than gold. That's the real treasure." As night settled over their land, stars appearing in the vast Texas sky, Willow Hayes knew with absolute certainty that she had everything a person could wish for: a love that had been chosen deliberately and tended carefully, a family created from that love, and a future stretching before them as promising as the land they cherished. Thomas had sought something shinier, something he thought would bring him happiness. But Willow had discovered the truth. Real happiness wasn't found in escape or in things that merely glittered. It was built day by day through work and trust and forgiveness, through seeing the true value in what you had and in who stood beside you. In the end, it wasn't about what Thomas had given up, but what she had found: a love as enduring as the land itself, as genuine as the gold band that still circled her finger, as real as the man who held her beneath the Texas stars.